Dave Ward and Friends is proud to be supported by Sonic Automotive. My family has driven a Sonic Automotive car for 12 years, and I know they're the best in the business. Whether it's purchasing a new or pre-owned car or servicing your current vehicle, let Sonic Automotive be your trusted car guides. Start looking for your new car at soniccars.com. Well, Houston, we've been through a lot together. We started in radio 60 years ago. It was such a great gig, my father cautioned me against going into this thing called television, but we did it, and we had a pretty good run. We even went from black and white to color TV, then to high definition. I keep hearing about streaming and digital, and, well, it's a chance to reconnect with my friends and viewers and share stories from our times together throughout these last 6 decades. What do you say, Houston? Let's do this. Hello, friends. I'm Dave Ward, and welcome to Dave Ward and Friends, a series of casual conversations with people I have met and friends I have made in my over 60 years of news reporting and broadcasting in radio and television here in Houston. I am very pleased today to have from England Charles Spencer, who has written a book. It's called The White Ship, and it is the most interesting book in the world. I've got to say, Charles, as Patton shouted to Rommel in World War II, I read your book.
Well, thank you. Yes.
I have read quite a bit of this book, and we'll talk about it. But tell me, it's right at 2 o'clock in the afternoon here. What time is it there in London?
It's 8 p.m., but I'm ready to go, Dave. You can throw anything at me.
Okay. Well, you are the 9th Earl Spencer and the owner of Althorp House. Some of my Houston friends may not be familiar with this extraordinary history. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, well, I'm very lucky to have inherited a house that's been in my family. We started as humble sheep farmers in the Middle Ages, and then we got lucky and built a house here at Althorp 500 years ago in 1508. And I'm the 19th generation of my family to live here. And I have the 20th generation upstairs asleep.
Well, you've been to Houston several times since I first met you back in, I think, 2005. Had you ever been to Houston before then? And, well, how about Texas? Had you been to Texas before?
Well, that was the first time I've been to Houston when I met you it was a charity event for the Fertitta family. But I've been to Texas many times, but that's the first time, that I've been to Houston. I've been to Austin. I've been all over, actually, Beaumont and all sorts of places in Texas. And I've always had a wonderful welcome there. I think there's a sort of connection between the Texans and the English, which I can't see from a historical point of view, but I think there's a natural sort of welcoming of people that comes with both cultures.
Yeah, I agree. Well, like I said, we first met you in 2005 or 2006 when Diana, a celebration, the exhibition commemorating the life of your sister, Princess Diana, that was at the Houston Museum of Natural Science.
Yes. Right. I can't believe it's that long ago, Dave, but I seem to think that about a lot of things these days.
Uh-huh.
But it was a wonderful exhibition. They did a great job. And the people of Houston turned out in huge numbers to pay their respects to Diana. And it's amazing. Here we are, over 24 years since she passed away, and people still have the fondest memories of her, which is a wonderful tribute.
Yes, it is. You did a fundraiser for the Princess Diana Foundation with my wife Laura's charity, Houston Children's Charity, and that was at the home of the Fertittas. You remember that?
I remember it well. I mean, I walked into the Fertitta's house, and I'm used to fancy houses, but it was like walking into a Four Seasons hotel. And I remember their pool, actually. That's what I remember most. This incredible pool with an island in it. And I thought, wow, that's a place to have a cocktail.
Yeah, really. You've unveiled your favorite portrait of Diana that was then installed in the exhibit, and a lot of money was raised for charities that do amazing work, right?
Well, I must say, hats off to the Americans. I'm actually married to a Californian who was born in Canada, and I'm constantly amazed by the philanthropic generosity of the American people. The Brits, we don't do it so much. You don't see a British wallet very often. But the Texans and the Americans generally are incredibly publicly spirited, and I know your wife was involved recently in a fundraiser that raised $2 or $3 million. These are incredible sums for people to raise for worthy causes.
Yes, my wife's annual fundraising gala was last Friday night, and they raised $2.8 million, which was an absolute record.
It's
For news.
incredible. If you think from one event, that is what an achievement. I've met your wife, and I'm not surprised that she's very effective in that area.
Yes, she is. She is the most amazing person I have ever met, male or female. And how she does what she does, I have no idea. You were so gracious to invite us to your home, and we did have that visit with the Fertitta family back in 2011. Remember?
I do. They turned up during my honeymoon, and they were most welcome. And they're not big travelers, actually. I mean, Mr. Petita's not he told me he'd only really been to Austria, I think, before. But, this is a house, it's a huge house built by my ancestors as a place of entertainment. And we were very, very happy to welcome the Fertitta family here.
Yeah. They had lunch with you and your new bride on July the 1st of 2011, which would have been your sister's 50th birthday. Then this was at your family's ancestral home, and also Diana's final resting place. I can't think of anything that would be more special than that.
It was wonderful. I remember them coming. I mean, Mrs. Fertitta is such a wonderful lady, and their daughter. What fantastic people. And it was the least I could do. They've always been so generous to so many charities that to have them here, even on a special day like that, was a great pleasure for me, and we enjoyed every second of it.
Wonderful. One thing you and I have in common, we're both married to beautiful women who raise money for very deserving charities and underserved, underprivileged children. The work that Laura does is really God's work. I have seen it in person. Can you tell me about how you met and the work that Karen does with her charity called Whole Child?
Yes, I met Karen on a blind date. Many, many years ago, I worked for the Today Show on NBC. That was from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s. And then about a dozen years ago, I got a call out of the blue from one of my colleagues on the Today Show. And she said, I found the perfect woman for you. And I turned up at this blind date at a restaurant in Los Angeles. And yes, Karen was very beautiful. But what really attracted to me more than the obvious was the fact that she had founded and chaired Whole Child International. And she was totally committed, passionately committed to helping the lives of abandoned and orphaned children in the developing world. And I found that really intriguing. And I've been with her to Nicaragua and El Salvador several times to see the work she does. And it's incredible. It's very scientific. It's not just sort of making kids feel better for the moment. It's trying to get a better system in place in these impoverished countries so you get better outcomes for the children. So like you, I have a beautiful wife doing God's work.
Wonderful. Then I interviewed you for ABC 13 here in Houston, and this was in 2015. You were in Houston for your furniture line.
My goodness, yes, I remember that well. Yes, I have this house here. I'm in the private kitchen here, so it's a more cozy atmosphere. But we have some rooms in here with some beautiful works of art and furniture, and the reproduced furniture, handmade around the world from the collection here. The proceeds go back to looking after and maintaining the collection at Althorp itself. So I was here for that. Yes, you're absolutely right, Dave, and I enjoyed our interview very much 6 years ago.
Well, wonderful. Well, what we're really here to talk about today is your new book. It's been a huge, huge hit in the United Kingdom. It's called The White Ship. And internationally, it's a big hit too. The White Ship. Tell us about this.
Yeah, well, I've written a few history books over the years. And for me, history is not some dry and dusty subject that you're put off by a bad teacher at school. It's more about people watching. So what I try and do, Dave, is try and find a really enormously exciting event in history and build a true narrative around it. And so the truth of this story is that pretty much exactly 900 years ago, at the end of 1120, the heir to the British crown got on board the White Ship, which was the Titanic of its day, to just make the short trip from Normandy to England, pretty much from Omaha Beach to the south of England. And everything went wrong. And he and the 300 most important people in England went down in a shipwreck. And it caused an utter catastrophe. 20 years of civil war, a change of dynasty. It was the end of the Normans. And we got the Plantagenets ruling England. And they ruled England for 350 years until the Tudors took over. And what I really find so amazing about this, it's all down to one mishap at sea that the whole of history changed forever. If the White Ship hadn't gone down, we wouldn't have had any of the familiar names from English history. There wouldn't have been King John and the Magna Carta. There wouldn't have been Henry VIII and the Six Wives. There wouldn't have been any of that. There wouldn't be Queen Elizabeth II. It all changed on one night 900 years ago.
Well, you've written several books, and I'm interested. Why did you decide to write about this particular story?
Well, it's thanks to an American audience, actually. So about 7 years ago, I was invited to give the keynote speech at one of the major castles in England to an American audience of tourists who are particularly interested in English history. And I was going through the history of the Queens of England, and it was because of the White Ship that a woman was about to become the first queen in her own right of England. And I told this tale about this dramatic shipwreck and everything that happened around it. And I sensed that for once I had the full attention of everyone in the room. And then I thought, wow, well, this is a good story. It's something I'd grown up with. As a child, I knew the story of the White Ship. In fact, I'm 57, anyone under my age probably wasn't taught this subject because it just dropped off the radar in English schools. But then a few years ago, I was looking up the White Ship just for my own interest, and I spotted this 900th anniversary coming up, and I said to my publishers, HarperCollins, I said, look, I know it sounds obscure, but this is basically Titanic meets Game of Thrones. And they went, okay, you can write that.
Well, I think you've explained this a little bit, but why does the sinking of the White Ship matter so much? And what was the immediate fallout from that?
Well, I think the main issue with the White Ship was that the whole hopes of England were on board that ship in the physical form of the passengers. The king at the time in England was called King Henry I, and he is one of the great kings of England. He set up the financial structure 900 years ago that's still in place today. He basically enforced the rule of law. He was a very strong and able king, quite cruel by your and my standards, but that was what was expected back then. Yeah. And he vested all his hopes for the future in his one legitimate son. He had many illegitimate children, but they could never become king or queen. So essentially, when this ship went down, the prince had a chance to get away. He was in the one lifeboat on board the White Ship with his bodyguards, and he heard his half-sister crying for help from the shipwreck, and he ordered the crew to turn the little boat around to go and rescue her. As they did so, the people who were drowning in the water, because nobody could swim in these days, they latched onto the side of the rowing boat and took it down. And with that boy drowning went the hopes of Norman England. It was the end of the line.
Well, Henry I seems to be the hero in this book. He was very much of an unknown figure. Tell us a little bit more about him.
So Henry I was never expected to be King of England. He was William the Conqueror's fourth and youngest son, but he seized the throne. One brother was killed in a hunting accident, and so he seized the throne of England, and then another one he beat in battle, and he took the crown of Normandy as well. He was brutal, and if I was going to cast him in a movie, it would be played by Russell Crowe. He was a sort of rough, tough figure, and you wouldn't mess around with Henry I. He was quite brutal. But, you know, we have to remember that the standards of the time, there was no police force, of course. The army was only ever where the king was. And so if you wanted to rule in those days, you had to be brutal to set an example and to make people frightened of you. So the death sentence was really out at this time, except for what they called common criminals. But I'm afraid in this book, there's an awful lot of terrible maimings, you know, sort of blindings and all sorts of things that men wouldn't want to happen to them go on in this scenario. But at the end of the day, you have a king who's truly in control. But the whole control that he has depends on his primary duty, which is producing an heir. And I'm afraid that heir disappeared on the White Ship.
Tell us about Henry I's only legitimate heir and how he died.
Well, so his only legitimate heir, so this is a man, I don't know whether we should be proud of this as British people or not, but he's our most fertile monarch. He had 22 illegitimate children that we know of, but only 2 legitimate ones. And the one legitimate son was a prince called William. And what we know about William is very unfair, because all the historians who write at this time, they're men of God. They're monks, or in fact, in one case, a nun. And they're the people who can write records down because they're literate. But at the end of the day, you know, they write very, very unpleasant things about this Prince William because he died. He died as a young man of 17. And so the chroniclers decide that he must have been a sinner. Why else would God have claimed him so young? But to be honest, Dave, I wouldn't want to be judged as my 17-year-old self. So I feel rather sorry for William. You know, he could have grown into a spectacular man and a very good monarch, but we'll never know.
Tell us, why was the butcher the only one to survive?
Well, this is an interesting point. The one man who survived this shipwreck, you think of all these great generals and dukes and princes, etc., who died, and the ladies. There were 18 very senior aristocratic ladies who drowned. They all drowned, I think, because it was a freezing night at the end of the year in the English Channel, a very cold stretch of water at the best of time. Nobody could swim. In fact, I looked into this. The only people I can find who could swim 900 years ago were directly connected with the water, such as fishermen who had to retrieve snagged nets. And the one man who survives this terrible catastrophe is Barreau, a butcher from Rouen. Rouen's the capital of Normandy at this time. And he, I think, survives because he manages to scramble on board a piece of broken mast from the White Ship. And he's dressed differently. You know, these aristocrats and royals, they're dressed in silks and animal sort of wolf skin that gets very waterlogged and it's not very thick. Barreau the butcher, we know, was dressed in wool and goat skin. And even if you are cold and wet, as long as you're out of the water, wool does give you a certain amount of body heat back. And I think that's the reason he's the only man to survive. The humblest man on board is the sole survivor.
Why did the captain of the ship allow himself to drown?
Well, Henry I was a terrifying figure, and the idea of giving him the bad news that his only legitimate son and several of his illegitimate children had died in a tragedy was too much. So the captain of the ship swims towards Barreau the butcher, who he sees perched on this bit of broken mast, and says, "What happened to the prince?" And Barreau says, I'm afraid I saw him drown. You know, he was pulled down in this rowing boat and he's gone. And the captain then lets himself sink. He knows there is no hope. He knows that if he does survive, he'll be put to death. So he lets himself slip under the waves. He's never seen again.
Wow. This is fascinating. How did you go about researching all of this?
Well, I have to say, the only problem I had, there were two problems actually with researching this. There was a limited number of sources from the time, because obviously I imagine there were more, but they've been lost over the past 900 years. So I was dealing with 9 written chronicles from 1120. People realized this was a cataclysmic result for the English crown, so they wrote about it. And I had to pick out of the account the very, very Christian view of everything. So I have full respect for Christianity, of course, and I am a Christian. But this is a time of very devout Christianity. So there isn't a Christian God like you and I might understand, with a sort of New Testament touch to him. The God who's involved in people's lives at this time is a very Old Testament, vengeful, quite strong God. And that is the one that the chroniclers saw through. When they were writing these events, they saw it all as revenge and smiting the enemy and all of that. So I had to put that to one side. And then on a practical basis, I do speak French, but the French from this time was Norman French. It's blended with Latin. It's very, very complicated. So I had to employ academics who specialize in this to decipher some of the more obscure words. But apart from that, I mean, I have to say it was really good fun, because it's a really extraordinary story. If I wrote this as fiction, Dave, people would say, oh, for goodness sake, pull yourself together. But this is true. And that's what I love, is finding a story from the past, which your average reader, you don't have to be a history expert. You don't have to understand all the minutiae of the politics of the time. You have to understand human nature, and that's what it's about.
Yeah. Tell us a little about Empress Matilda and some of the other impressive and strong women in this book.
Yeah, I think that's such a good question, because I think for a lot of us think, you know, these women had no status, no rights at this time. But it's not true. So the Empress Matilda, who you ask about, was King Henry I's other legitimate child, and she was the elder of the two. So the prince, the younger one, dies in the White Ship disaster, and then Henry I decides he'll do something really different, and rather than let his country descend into anarchy at his death, because there is no male heir, he decides to appoint his sole surviving legitimate child, his daughter, the Empress Matilda, as his successor. And in fact, I'm sitting in the middle of England here, and 5 miles from where I'm sitting, the king called all of the great men in England together in a town called Northampton, and he made them swear allegiance to his daughter. They all did this because they were terrified of Henry. But as soon as he died in a very odd way. He ate too many lampreys, which is basically eels. They were too rich for him to digest, and he died of indigestion. But when he died, 15 years after the White Ship, with no new sons and leaving everything to his daughter, Matilda, people thought, well, we don't really want a queen. And I'm not trying to justify that thinking, but I've tried to think what it was all about. And I think what it is that in this day and age, which we're talking about 900 years ago, your king or queen, you couldn't really have a queen in her own right, because the monarch was expected to lead armies into battle. And it was beyond the medieval mind to think of a young lady leading them into battle. So she was cast aside until the king, the new king, was a man called Stephen. And interestingly, he's part of the White Ship story in his own right, because he's the one man to have got off the ship before it set sail. If he had gone on it, he would have died. But he got off because he had an upset stomach. That upset stomach saved his life. He seized the crown. He turned out to be a very weak king. And then people remembered, we can support the Empress Matilda. And so that remembered loyalty led to a terrible civil war.
Tell us what happened when the monks came to bless the ship before it sailed.
Well, this actually that's very good because it goes back to the point I made about people really not being able to swim. Imagine getting on a ship in 900 years ago where you can't swim and you're really at the mercy of the elements. So if you were on a grand ship, such as the White Ship, monks from the local monastery would come and bless the ship before it sailed. The problem with the White Ship was that the young prince and his friends, all these very glamorous young royals and aristocrats, had decided to have a bit of a party before setting off, and they got very drunk. They got the crew drunk of the White Ship too. And so when the monks came to bless the White Ship before its voyage, these sort of idiot, drunk young men chased the monks away. And so it was later seen as absolutely provoking the wrath of God by being so sort of hopelessly boorish and chasing away the monks and not getting the blessing before setting sail.
Wow, that's amazing. Just one final. There are no images of the White Ship. So how did you know it was white?
I know it was white because when the captain of the White Ship was trying to persuade Henry I to take his ship back to England, he talks about it being white. And I've looked into that. Why was it white? How would you make a ship white back then? You couldn't really paint it. I mean, you could paint it, but we all know what the sea does to wood and paint. So I think it must have been lime washed, the wood. And this would fit. So we're talking really about Normandy in 1120. And Normandy, this chunk of northern France, was really still a Viking province. If we think back to the Vikings from several hundred years before, not a lot had changed in terms of culture. And white in the Viking culture was the color of celebration. So my view would be that the White Ship was what we would call a party ship. It was something that was for fun and for celebration. And that's why it was white and kept white. And that's why the captain could proudly point to it being white. But it is an extraordinary thought that the White Ship actually was white.
Well, Charles, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. I want to show you this book one more time, The White Ship by Charles Spencer. Charles, this has been fascinating. I thank you for your time and thank you for writing this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I'm most grateful for the chat. And let's do it again soon.
Okay. And I want to thank all of you for joining me here on Dave Ward and Friends. Buckle your seatbelts, friends. You won't believe the VIP perks that Sonic Automotive is offering you. $500 cash toward a new vehicle, $250 cash toward a pre-owned vehicle, 25% off any repair or service, and more. Thank you, Sonic Automotive, for being the official sponsor of the Dave Ward and Friends podcast. To see the VIP perks they're offering my friends, visit soniccars.com.